Howdy folks, welcome to the Daily Coin. My name is Rory and today is Friday, November the 16th, 2018. And I have the very distinct honor and great pleasure of bringing you guys another show with Tom Luongo. This is a follow-on of the conversation that we had last week. And this is covering the finance and the dollar, whereas we covered the elections before. This is a really great piece of information, and it's completely different from what you have already heard. So hope you enjoy, and without any further ado, here we go. Well, I wanted to get into some of the more geopolitical issues.
Okay.
If you've got time, I would love to.
Yeah, maybe we can do another 15 minutes or so.
Okay. I would love to get your take because you know a lot about gold.
Mhm.
You know a lot about what's going on with China and Russia alliances, with the BRICS, the EAEU, the BRI, the SCO, all of these economic alliances, these military alliances that are outside of the Western world.
Mhm.
And it's a very big subject as well. Just like
Yeah, I don't think I can do it in 15 minutes, but we can touch on some of the we can touch on some of the issues certainly.
Okay. Well, let me
Sure.
just see if we can get a few minutes on what your research is showing, Tom, in regards to the demise of the world reserve currency system and how this is going to play out, because that is very, in my opinion, that is very much on the table at this point
Oh yeah.
because of these alliances, because of what's happening, what the majority of this conversation has been about, which is nationalism, populism, and people kind of looking more inward as opposed to outward and getting rid of this globalization, this globalist nonsense.
Mhm.
And the world reserve currency system, that's what that you have to have that in order to support all of that nonsense. So
Right.
people are moving away from that. So what does your research show as far as what's happening with that and how it's going to be replaced?
Well, it's not going to happen tomorrow.
No,
Let's start with that. Yeah, I know, and I know you didn't mean that, but it's important to understand when we have these discussions and we do and we talk about this stuff, because it's really easy to connect dots and to start the process. Especially in Austrian economics is a very, very good qualitative tool, right? Because they'll tell you what's going to happen, but it can't tell you what the timeline looks like, because it's
Right.
not built for that. It's not designed to do that, right? And I made this mistake years ago, thinking that 2008 was the end of it, and yada yada. I mean, everybody's gone through their evolution on this, right? I mean, we all have. It's
Yes.
there's no shame in this.
No.
Educating yourself and getting better at what you do. If you're right all the time, you might as well just kill yourself. There ain't nothing to learn, right? Right? I mean, what's the point of living if you're not going to wake up tomorrow and learn something new?
True.
Right? I mean, that's the point. That's why we do what we do. We have a purpose in life, is to go and do something different. Okay. But to get off the philosophy for a minute. So it's important to understand that the timeline is in this period between now. Martin Armstrong puts it at somewhere around the end of 2032 or so. Right, his pi cycle work, which I have some sympathy for. I think there's some meat on those bones. I'm not sure how much I believe in all of it, but I think there's some meat on those bones, and I think it has to do with a number of physical things in the universe and our particular circumstances, and that's fine. It is how things work. So I think there's some meat on those bones, right? Tied to solar cycles and all the other things that are going on. So we've got this period between now and 2032 where there's going to be a shift in global capital flows. And now, where do we think is going to be what comes after the United States? Well, looking at the world today and looking at the trends that are in motion, that replacement's going to China, whether China wants it or not. And I don't think that they do any more than anybody else does, because you can make the argument that the United States doesn't really want to have the world's reserve currency because it's a burden that is very, very difficult to maintain. But that's what capital does, right? It flees instability and runs towards stability. So the process is a multi-stage process. And the first thing that has to happen is the most politically unstable large economy has to fail. And that's the European Union.
Okay.
Because the European Union is built on a faulty premise, which is that they can have a single currency for 27 different economies with different values to the labor pool. Okay. And it's all tied to, and it's all debt-based fiat script money anyway, and it doesn't really mean anything, and yada yada. Okay, fine. Even leaving all that aside, even leaving what the money is made out of, which is relevant, but it's not the core problem. The core problem is that the average Italian laborer's value is not the same as the average German's, but yet they have a common currency, and that they can all issue debt, right? So it's like the United States and Illinois being able to issue treasury debt to cover its pension arrears.
Bad plan.
No, it's a very bad plan. There's different rates and then you're gonna have different rates you're gonna have different bond rates, but still all denominated in the euro, and the whole thing is just a mess. It's so bad. It's so anathema to even responsible tyrannical government. This is irresponsible tyrannical government, right? So that's why the EU has to fail. That's why I bang my shoe on this table like Khrushchev every day. It's Europe first. The question is, when does the focus shift? And I think now that we're past the midterms, the focus will shift back to Europe's problems. We have Merkel is in trouble. We've got Macron's approval ratings are dropping like a rock. Salvini is poking them in the eye everywhere in Italy and winning on every front. He's just pulling Trumpism after Trumpism after Trumpism over and over again. The guy is a freaking juggernaut. I love him.
Yes.
I'm so proud to be Italian right now. Okay. I'm second generation Italian immigrant on both sides of my family, going back to the Moorish invasion, right? I mean, that's how Italian I am. For once, I get to finally be proud in the 20th/21st century of being Italian. It's been a long time coming. But you've got Salvini, you've got Orban in Hungary, putting up a wall, and I don't mean a physical wall. I mean a philosophical wall, a tradition wall that needs to happen. A retraditionalization that's happening in Hungary. It's also happening in Russia at a rate that is unbelievable.
It's unparalleled.
It is unparalleled in the history of man.
Yes.
I'm actually writing about it in this month's newsletter that'll be out. We're hoping to publish on Sunday.
Cannot wait. Will I be able to read that? Will we be able to? Because
if you're a patron,
okay.
Right, that's how I make my living. My newsletter is my living, right?
Okay.
So for patrons, if you're interested in anything you've heard today, you can go to Patreon/GoldGoatsAndGuns, and you can sign up, or you can go to my website and you can find the link there. But I'm trying to think ahead now to where we are and where we're going, and I know I'm talking around the whole. The world's reserve currency thing. I don't think we're going to have one single reserve currency when we're done. I think it's good. They're going to be regional. This is the way they should be. We don't need a reserve trade currency. We don't need one currency to denominate all trade. And if we do need one, it's not going to be of the kind that we've had previously. It'll be some intermediary thing, some crypto-based intermediary thing. If we start really thinking about 10, 12, 15 years from now. Because think about how far we've come in the crypto assets since 2013 or so. Because the first 4 or 5 years of Bitcoin, when I was into it, and I was in it back then, were not all that interesting, which is why I got out of it. I just thought it was cute, and then I moved on with my life, and and my early Bitcoins that I had wound up getting stolen. So, but look at where they are, and look at what problems they solve. They solve all the problems that we have currently today, right? Donald Trump weaponizing, and the United States government weaponizing the financial messaging system, SWIFT.
Exactly.
Okay, it solves T+3 settlement problems, right? And I mean by T+3 is a time plus 3 day settlement, which even your credit card has a T+3 settlement mechanism. And I listen to people. I have subscribers who argue with me about this stuff all the time. I'm like, you do realize that Visa is a T+3 settlement period, right? But for money transfers that need to settle in 3 minutes or 10 minutes, I'm using Bitcoin because it's going to work. And trust is what's necessary, right? And trust and consensus is what's absolutely necessary. And we need that, and we need a return to consumer sovereignty if we're going to move forward. And I think that's one of the things that Martin Armstrong is missing in all of his discussion about where we're headed. is that we're reaching a peak of consumer insovereignty, where the consumer has no sovereignty, and that producers have been biased in the market and the marketplace for money. Everybody's worried about, well, producer prices dropped and they won't produce, and then the supply chains will collapse, and then the futures markets will collapse. Like, no. But at the same time, so you did that, you ruined all the savers. So you thieved from all the savers in order to continue propping up the banks and the producers, who are all, by the way, caught naked out over a malinvested cliff, right? Building a bridge to nowhere, and want to continue building that bridge over a chasm. Unlike Wile E. Coyote, they're just standing there now, and now they're asking and they're asking for a net, and they can't have them. That has to end. So either we hyperinflate or we hyper-deflate. Either way, if you're a holder of hard assets, and I mean by hard assets, I mean gold, cryptos, tangible assets, claims on tangible assets. This is where Martin Armstrong is correct. Claims on tangible assets. What would those be? Stocks, commodities. Those are going to do well. Those are going to outperform, and income streams based on those things are going to do well. Why? Because when it's in a crisis period, when we start losing faith in our government institutions, that's just the only thing that's going to change the world's reserve currency status of who has it. It's going to be the countries whose debt they trust the most. Right now, that's the United States. We've never defaulted on our debt. It's our greatest asset as a country. We've never defaulted on a bond issue. We've always paid our debts. We've always paid our coupons. The day we don't do that, or the day that there's a real fear that we're not going to do that, is the day that it all ends. And that's what a sovereign debt crisis looks like. That's the catalyst for the sovereign debt crisis. And Europe is staring that in the face right now. Japan can continue to play their game because most of the buyers of Japanese debt are Japanese, and it's domestically held. But Europe isn't. And Europe is heavily exposed to emerging market debt, which is all dollar denominated. And now that we're past the midterms, looking at the political instability in Europe, looking at the relative stability here in the United States, Trump is now reaffirmed. The dollar is going to rise. The Fed's raising interest rates to bail out the pension funds here in the United States. It's going to put upward pressure on rates, and it's going to put downward pressure on dollar liquidity, just like we've been seeing. But we're going to see more of it. We've had a little bit of an interregnum here for the last couple of months while they tried to bomb the markets to make Trump look bad. But once that's finished, once that starts to firmly establish itself as the narrative, right? Merkel's problems, Macron, Brexit, all of these things. If Brexit is betrayed, what happens if Brexit is betrayed? Do you know what happens at that point? Like the British, the Brits are screwed in a way that they'll never recover from. So,
wow.
These are things that are, and then all the people you talked about at the outset of your question when you brought this up, the EAU, the SCO, all that, Russia, China, all that stuff, all they're doing is building an institutional architecture,
right,
to allow for the capital inflow that's going to happen to them as the West implodes. And we either hyperinflate our troubles away by first an IMF SDR, which, where the central bank of the central banks bails out the central banks, right? Or a hyper-deflation, which they'll never allow to happen, because we made the decision back in the 1930s that better to inflate troubles away than to allow them to deflate, which is why we're where we are today. And it's why savers are continually thieved from by the monetary system and by their governments. But they're just building the architecture to allow for people to have the confidence to move their capital over there. That's what those institutions are for. And so they're going to take time to develop, and they're very much in their infancy. They'll take time to develop.
Well, they're as far as the most of that is already built out.
Yes,
and but
the societies are not quite ready to handle all that capital.
Now that they got a long way to go because of the.
I mean, outside of China and Moscow and St. Petersburg and whatnot, there's still a long way to go to take Central Asia and bring them up out of the Dark Ages. Yeah, but there's tremendous capital potential there. Yeah, tremendous opportunity.
I think it was about a year ago, Kyrgyzstan, which is a country of about 6 million people. Their number one currency was cattle.
Yes,
Kyrgyzstan. And the president of their national bank changed all their policies so that to encourage people to hold physical gold, and his goal was to have each citizen to possess 100 grams of gold, which was
Oh yeah,
and
that
it's
would be
like
tremendous.
okay. Now, I mean, and think about going from your number one currency is a cow
Hmm.
to shifting to gold, and just the
That's just like we did
mindset,
550. This is like we did 5,000 years ago, right?
right?
I mean, I mean,
It's
you're
going to
just
take a minute.
yeah, it's going to take a little bit of time. It's not going to happen overnight. I mean, there's still parts of the world that use goats as, man measures his wealth in goats. It's kind of the why. I mean, I raise goats, right? So the gold, goats, and guns comes from the fact that I own goats and I milk my goats every day, and for a variety of reasons that have to do with being lactose intolerant, and I love goats, and I've had more goats in the past than I have right now. I just have a couple right now, but I've run an entire herd of meat goats, and it's
Wow.
hard and it's difficult work, and I don't recommend it to anybody who wants to actually make any money in this world. Um, but goats also really tasty, so
Yes,
all
it
depends on
is.
what you. So, but my goat milk is to die for, so I'm good, and I make a hell of a cheese. So, um, but the how you measure your wealth is very important. And
Yes,
some of the things that we've been discussing, privately for a while now about some of these ideas and about money and the need for credit money versus the need for base money and all of this stuff. And I'm like, people always misinterpret me when I say that, money doesn't necessarily need to be inflationary. Matter of fact, it's actually better if it isn't inflationary, and that it just allows for more resolution. The need for more money rises from the need for more resolution in comparison of two objects. As the division of labor gets more diverse and gets more sophisticated, the level of comparison between objects that the medium of exchange needs to resolve gets thinner and thinner and thinner. And therefore and if you only have, if your divisible unit is the penny, right? And you
right.
can't go any lower than that, then what do? You have to make more dollars. It's like when you start a game, when you start playing some video game, and and you kill it, and you're like, oh, you're gonna rack up some kills in some game, right? And they give you 100 points for every kill, so they can give you 50 points for something minor, and 10 points for something even more minor, right? Because they got to start somewhere. Like
Right.
they have to be able to do that. They have to be able to divide down. Otherwise, they're giving you tens of points or hundreds of points, and that just seems silly. Well, one of the great things about cryptos is that you can have a deflationary currency with infinite resolution because it's just digits. So when I was in Bitcoin and they were trading originally, when they were trading for 5.5 cents a piece, right?
Okay.
Whatever. You took 200 Bitcoins, bought a candy bar. Well, today, 20,000 Satoshis, which is 10 to the minus eighth, 10 to the minus 8 Bitcoins, buys a candy bar. Now we just talk about it in different terms. We can keep making new, but it can all be based on the same. It can all be based on the same asset. Is the point? There's no
Right.
reason to change the underlying asset and the algorithm under which that asset's new monetary units come into play. The great revolution that has to take place in money. Two things. One, we have to remove humans from making the decision about how many new monetary units to bring into account at any one time. Humans have to be out of that decision. Why? Because humans have an incentive to print more monetary units and inflate and counterfeit and steal from each other, right? That's the problem. The problem with even a commodity-based money like gold, problem with gold, of course, is that it's not transportable enough. It's not fungible enough. It truly isn't. And I understand that. Digital versions of gold are great, but then you have to pay for the storage and there's all these other costs, and it's fine. Don't get me wrong. I love gold. I own gold. I recommend gold to everybody. I'm not trying to downplay gold, but we live in a digital economy. We live in a world of digital money where even the 90% of all the dollars in existence are digital, right? So I want a better version of that. And I want humans out of the discussion, the decision-making process, the creation of new monetary units, right? Then, and that the algorithms all need to be open source. Mike Krieger over at Liberty Krieg makes this point all the time, that in order for this to be right, we can't, the two things that have to occur, and this is what you see in the cryptos, that we have the humans are out of the decision, and the algorithm that brings those into creation, those new units into creation, should be open source for everybody to understand what it is. There should be no secrets. So you take those two things together, and the more we remove ourselves from proprietary code. You and I, before we went live, we were talking about how, we didn't like Microsoft, we do like Apple, or none of that. It's all proprietary code, right?
Right.
That's the biggest problem we have today. Google has the power that it has because of proprietary code. Same thing with Apple, same thing with Facebook, and all these things. Even though they rest all of their businesses on a publicly paid for commons, they have the nerve to say that they're private companies. Yeah, okay. They're as private as Martin Marietta or Lockheed Martin. They're not. Right?
No.
They're as private as Gazprom is. Just to like really drive the point home, right? That's how private they are. Their business is based on being able to transmit data over public data networks that were paid for with public taxes and are maintained through public taxes.
Yep.
Okay. So that argument doesn't fly with me whatsoever.
No.
And even the radical libertarian that I am doesn't fly. So we need open source. All this software needs to be open source. That's how we get around deplatforming, dehumanizing behavior. That's how we connect content creators directly with their fans without the middleman. And we get rid of control of the wire. And this is another theme that I hit on all the time. The wire being a metaphor for the transmission networks of information. And that's what they're desperately trying to hold on to. And the definition of the wire constantly changes, but the wire is the important part. And so that's what the Russians and the Chinese understand. And they're trying to wrest the control of the wire away from the United States. But they're not necessarily to take it from them and then institute their own version, but just so that they can run their countries and their economies their way without as much fear of intervention. There should be competition for control of the wire, always. Or there should be no competition because nobody owns it. And once we reach that state, I think we'll be as close to a golden age as human beings can create.
That's where we need to be. Is no control of the wire.
Exactly.
There should not be any overlord of that. And we only have a handful right now that have complete and absolute control.
Yep.
Of it. And it's the 6 corporations that own all the media, and it's Google and Facebook and Apple. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
It is. It's terrible, but it's like everything else. It'll change. The blockchain is already affecting that. It's slow. It's in its infancy, but it's coming. And the great part about last year's pump and dump in the cryptos is the following. So many projects got so overcapitalized that they have enough capital to run their projects and develop their projects for 5, 6, 7 years before they ever have to go back to the markets.
Wow.
And sell equity. Think about it. Think about these guys were putting projects together in early 2017 based on a $200 or $300 Bitcoin price. Who cares if it went to 20 grand and back down to 6? They're still 30 times overcapitalized.
Right.
Relative to what they originally conceived the project was going to cost. And they were going to do the whole thing on a couple $100,000, and now all of a sudden they've got $20 million.
Yeah, that's a very significant difference.
Yes, it is.
Well, we've been speaking with Tom Luongo, and you can find all of Tom's great work over at tomluongo.me, and his work falls under the banner of Gold, Goats, and Guns. Tom, this has been an unbelievable pleasure, and I really hope that we can do it again in the not too distant future.
I'd be happy to, Rory. I had a blast. I always enjoy doing stuff like this. It's fun.
This is great. So I'm not going to take up any more of your time, and I certainly appreciate all that you've given us, and have a wonderful afternoon.
You too, sir. You take care. Have a great weekend.